There's something the anti-American that I was thinking about this. So something that has popped up. Okay, so a frustration exists on now. Even moderates are having this. Even like the party Democrat liberals are now having this. They're having this type of specific frustration with the left that they've become anti-American. So it's even beyond anything necessarily Marxist, that it's, well, we don't really believe in truth, or this truth is subjective crapola that Marxists and leftists have brought into everything. I've been thinking about, well, okay, one of the things is that old the old left liberals, they basically at a certain point had this distrust of the other members of the early states. So this is the problem that they're left with after the revolution is now we're all stuck here together. So how do you unify these various groups of European descendants and their various power structures? Because this would have included the Catholic Spanish. This would include the what would have been the French Acadians, and we call them the Cajuns now at the time. How do we include them? And them being significantly different. And then the black question: what are they? Are they citizens, or are they people that are going to go back? This was a bunch of major questions, big sets of questions that had to be asked. And Democrats tend to be the people who are of a school of thought that if there was a strong central government, there could be fundamentally sort of a deciding power over this, a power that could govern all the disparate interests of these disparate racial and ethnic groups. The Democrats kind of never stopped in some vein thinking along these lines. It makes a lot of sense when you think about Europe and people who were later, what I've detected, you see the later Europeans. So the people who, not my people, not my father's people, who were here in the early to mid 1700s, like they saw this become a country. I'm talking about the people who came way later. Like you're talking about like the Gilded Age through the 1920s. And these people who come here, and the party that makes sense to them are the Democrats, because they cannot conceive of what the Republicans are. That the Republicans descend in a school of thinking that comes directly out of the American experience by the actual working class Appalachians, those Appalachians being of Scottish and variant Irish descent. So this is a unique group that had the idea called freedom. No other group had this. They had liberties, that somebody powerful gave you freedoms, not that you were free as a state. So this is something I want to keep reiterating that comes out of especially the renegade history of our country and American Nations by Woodward. That because I like going back over it, because something that this end of the working class history is only utilized often by Democrats for the advantage of the Democratic Party and what they kind of want at the time. Are they going to benefit off the unions? Are they going to use the unions to basically separate all the racial groups so that they could kind of have the black union, the Polish union, the Irish union, things like that, the Mexican union, as jobs will attract clusters of racial groups at the low skill levels, just because low skilled people will get their friends and family hired. It's just the way that tends to be. That's the way humans are. They could trust their family member doing the job next to them. It's yeah. So and it all gives them experience in a field that they can then help each other advance in. This, I mean, it's an ages-old method of being a sojourner. Yeah. So, so something I've been thinking about is the frustration that is happening is, so stuff like this. You see, when the Democrats will and the liberals, the people who are of the far left, they will kind of alter the idea of what is factual. So these are things, the way I kind of, went over it, it wasn't the most detailed of histories, but this does, like, kind of cover some things that many people just they wouldn't have seen it this way. This is why redlining is normal in cities that Democrats have controlled for 100 years or more. Like, that's where you see redlining. It's because and for better or for worse. I mean, remember, this would have been normal, very normal people who would have liked, like, teachers' unions and labor unions. These would have been people, though, that would have also at the same time thought, well, yeah, it's a good idea that you're keeping everybody in their sections of town. Who knows what they would do to one another otherwise? There wasn't really anybody thinking, oh, yeah, you could just stick people together and it will work. No one was really thinking this. Only the furthest end of the kind of the most wild-eyed thinking people of the day. And they wouldn't have come across as people that, like, you could say, oh, yeah, good thing you have a great argument for this. Because they wouldn't have had. They wouldn't have had they would not have had such an argument. People who say the Republican argument would be, well, you shouldn't really do such things because it really is a little, like, distasteful and maybe a little wrong. It comes across as a scheme. But also they might have thought, well, and as well, this local area wants that as the way it does things. So they would have also had to have been like, that's what the locals want. That's how it is. Because that was very much kind of that school of thinking, subsidiarity, relying upon constitutional subsidiarity. I was looking for that word like a few days ago, and I'm like, why is this just gone? So, I mean, I've been thinking about this. It's hard to come up with this idea of, like, this great sort of united, the bold, amazing, kind of artistic and romantic united body of a nation when a nation is built on subsidiarity and local power. It's hard, so you have to come up with a different kind of imagery. This is why Manifest Destiny never existed. At the time, there was no such thing. This was written about later by writers. Writers invented Manifest Destiny later, after it happened. This wasn't something that that at the time in newspapers, people were seeing Manifest Destiny. Oh my gosh, what an incredible idea, and they were, yes, I'm going to take some land from the Wichita or something, from the Wichita Indians, I'm going to make lots of images of white men wrestling Indians as the town symbol. I like how nobody gets that one, like that idea, like, because wrestling is fair. It was a fair contest between men, like that's why that's the image, like the respect of wrestling a man, yeah. So anyway, there's this denial of, you experience that, you are accurate, what you have said is true. The left basically gets to rewrite everything. And then you get the full-on anti-American and the anti-Westerner, where and now this is the stage why, like, I thought about it, that was it. Scott Adams saying the new thing is everything is bullshit. Now, the reason why is because of the anti-Americans and the anti-Americans being smoked out. So one of the top anti-American kind of mythologies is that Islam is okay, Islam is biblical, and Islam preserved the knowledge of the ancient world. When none of these are true. That it looks like Islam is something invented after the Arabs started an empire. The Arabs started an empire that they could barely really pull off. And so they really started grabbing a lot of people from the Syrian world, like so Syrian conquerors, Persian soldiers. They just started grabbing sort of the various forces that would rebel against what was left of the Byzantine and Roman and Greek world forces. And so then it becomes this thing of, and then what was this knowledge they preserved? Oh, ancient Greek knowledge. So this means that it was existent. It was there. Like somewhere, ancient Greek knowledge was there. It existed, and they supposedly preserved it, but that doesn't matter. If they supposedly preserved it, it already existed. So that means the prior owners of that knowledge, the Byzantine Christians, had preserved this. So this idea that Islam preserved all kinds of amazing secrets of the ancient world is simply like, it's just kind of this thing that it took, a little bit of a walkthrough in that sense, that simple one. But then when you find out in detail how inaccurate this is, and that it's like, no, Islam burns every book. This is why in the Islamic world, Thomas Sowell had to point out, only in the Christian world, in the European shaped world, are there the ancient writings of every group of people available commonly to school children in stores. Any child could buy the Tao Te Ching. We even have them adapted to youth through the Tao of Piglet and the Tao of Pooh and the Duh of Piglet. So we've even adapted them. We found them, they were so important, and also that we found something universally applicable in the British island experience, the fantasy world of Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh and Piglet. Because why? Because the Western world is the motherfucking shit. That is why everybody wants to come here. So the anti-Americans and anti-Westerners have to tear down everything, and they have to make things up. And so in making up everything they did about how great Islam is, they made sure to cover up how the slave trade was almost the only way that Islam could keep it going. And that sort of the backwards poverty, this sort of constant ardor and extreme amounts of work that people had to go through in the Anglosphere and the colonial Eurosphere, one of the main reasons was because more and more and more of the squeeze being put by Britain and America, specifically on the slave trade. So you had to pay people. This therefore makes the mints have to print coinage, especially in silver. So that therefore means there's silver in circulation for labor, as payment for labor. And once you have something like that, you have an advanced economy now. So people can't even fathom. So Islam was literally holding back all economics and holding science hostage, literally, because at a certain stage, they would just say, well, this work is blasphemous in itself. We don't know why it was translated into our language. We're going to burn it. And Christian monks would try to buy Aristotle's works from the Muslims before it was destroyed. Jews would try to buy various ancient works to translate into Hebrew and Aramaic before it was destroyed. And it's because of the nature of Islam being founded on the Quran, the Sunnah, and Sirah, and having nothing to do with the biblical tradition, the Psalms, the Book of Kings, any of that. None of that's there. It's literally stories about Muhammad, what Momo did, what Momo said in the life of Momo, and that's it. It's a cult of Momo. And the anti-Americans have, and a lot of anti-Western mystics, mystical organizations like to prop up Islam as something that it really just wasn't. I mean, and that really, when one looks at the writings of especially a lot of Orthodox, or the Orthodox Church, you start to find actually, no, there's a lot of the sort of daring ideas about human equality were things long discussed by the church fathers already, and so there was nothing just that profound about there's just nothing was happening that was really that amazing. It's that they kind of like pointing out, look at how amazing an insight this was, and it said, so did you guys figure that out after you destroyed every library in the ancient world? But the anti-Americans and anti-Westerners don't want you to know that's really what their heritage truly was. And the Eastern Passage, how the intercontinental African slave trade simply could never have thrived without the Islamic world's requirement for all those slaves, and that their method, they would castrate their slaves, they would unicize them, and so that was that, and that's the end of the world that came from. The way that the Albanians were treated, that's where that comes from. So the stuff like Tariq Nasheed would say, like, what he's just talking about Islamic slavery of the very parts of the world that he's not talking about America. He just doesn't know what he's talking about because he's an anti-American, anti-Westerner. People like that can't really even thrive without having a society that allows them that luxury, truly, and that, because that's what it is. It's Tariq Nasheed it's a luxury that he gets to have a society that preserves a space for him to criticize it in the way that he does. And then this is then the next frustration is, do you all realize how not oppressed you are because you're allowed to talk about it? Like, they don't know what Turkey really is like for people who are not in the good standing of the Turkish government at the time. They don't know you could just be beaten up in the streets. They don't get that. They don't get, like, all over the world, violence is a solution all the time, and a lot of the time for dissent. And so there's this open frustration now with the new left, that the old left is having to sit back and think, like, okay, what is the deal with the old left is looking at the new left and thinking, like, do you not really see how this is a bit hypocritical? Like, what is this? There's some, like, weird music playing or something. It's oh my God, what is that? That's terrible. It's just some whack shit. Some intensely whack shit. So the frustration now that you're getting from, like, the right is this thing of, there is no more debating these people because, like, say with, like, science, that, these are people that they will not be, that they will do anything to detract from Western the Western European descended society and its sphere of influence around the world, and thinking that they're trying to help some kind of groups that were wronged or something at some stage by the Western Europeans, and that they would have never been conquered by China or Japan. They would have never been conquered by any of their neighbors. Another thing that's kind of weird is that there's never that thought about it, like nobody ever is really honest about the violence of South and Central America that is natively there. That like these were totally separate peoples. These were peoples with their own world, and that they were at war with one another at all times, like everybody else everywhere, trying to look for, their territory and establish their territory and sphere of influence, and there's just this denial that that's a part of the state of things with nations and ethno-nationalities. So nobody will be really honest about, well, no, Aztec culture to Mexico is foreign. It's actually from Ute culture. The Mayans were a totally different group. And then we have all these other groups that we still don't even know who they ever were. We just know they once were there. And they were gone long time ago. We don't even know. I mean, they didn't leave anything behind, and that we could discern like absolutely who these people were. And their constructions were fascinating unto themselves. I know, I want to say it's like Tibet. No. I can't. No, I'm gonna murder the name. I'm gonna murder it. Yeah. It's this one specific that it had these fascinating kind of off-center, almost swastikas on the walls, on the courtyard walls. So it was like it looked almost like modern art, the way that their designs were of wall art. So I kind of wondered if there was murals within the spaces, but nobody knew anymore. Nobody was sure anymore. And the paint had faded by that time. But maybe, who knows. But anyway, so you end up like even say genomic science that, to find out like, oh yeah, well, yes, Cleopatra being, like rare, red-haired or even fairish, would make sense, because we actually do know Cleopatra's lineage, and she wouldn't have been what we would think of as native Egyptian, but she would have been the bloodline of people who you would have seen in Egypt a lot, because these were all these people who had emigrated there, because Egypt was one of the major emigration points across the ancient world for the literate class and the established class. But people will just do this thing like, it Africa, she black, 'cause it Africa, you stupid. And it's just like, well, no, I mean, the genomic science actually is buttressed by all the other information we have. That whole thing of, well, what we know is this, and then we have this other data that buttresses it. And you realize that is falling, that's pearls to swine. You're throwing pearls to swine here. That more and more the new left, which is a larger and larger portion of Democrats and the liberals in general, are now these people that you like trying to make them understand. No, there's really the Human Genome Program. Like none of these people, I have still not met almost a single person who's had Human Genome Project in their vocabulary, but wants to talk about science, and especially when it came to the PCR testing, I'm like, no, that's actually a type of more genomic testing, like that tests their genome. They didn't know what that term was. So I'm like, yeah, you don't know what that term is because you're unfamiliar with you don't have really a grasp of science. Not really. You think that something having to do with abortion as opposed to not abortion is science. That's it. That's about it. That everybody's equal because of science. But now, an article came out a few days ago trying to tell the normies about genomics. They're all going to learn. They're going to learn the hard way. They're going to learn the hard way because that's how they got to learn, because they're normies. So that's what, and that's I think what really is the next thing, is constantly going through the comedy episode, the tragic comedy episode, where you're watching everybody learn about something. Oh, the PCR testing, yada, yada, yada. What that means is this. So we all got bamboozled. And then somebody like me is like, and at the end of the comedy show, I get to walk out, scowl, and say, I told you so. And that's my line, and I think that's starting to, that's wearing on people. I told you so, you dumbass, is wearing on people. Being Red Foreman in an endless episode of that 70s show, but it's like more of, it's not that 70s show. It's when it turned into that 80s show, or totally 80s show, that it's just a constant chintzy knockoff. You're constantly having to tell people, I told you fucking so. How'd you fall for this shit again? Like, what? How did you fall for it again, Lucy? Lucy, how'd you do this again? So, yeah, just something I was rolling through my head today. Like, a little of the lighter side of that last video I made. Yeah, it's hard to keep treating it like a sitcom when it's real life. It's hard to keep treating all this like a sitcom. All right, later.